And now I'd like to welcome Professor Boyd Swinburn on stage. Here he comes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and it's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful, wonderful place. The question I was given was, how did we get here? Well, for me that's a fairly easy answer, I have to say. You just get on a plane and 2 days later you end up in Uppsala, and then you walk up this beautiful hill past all the autumn colours to this wonderful castle. But I don't think that's what the organisers meant by this question. How do we get to the state we're in? We're having this conference here and we have echo reports and so on dealing with the problems affecting our future generations. Just before we get on to that and answering that question, today actually is World Obesity Day, in case you didn't know, and the theme is childhood obesity. And this is a snapshot from the World Obesity website. So I co-chair the policy and prevention section. And so today is a big day for this. And if you want to go and see what the numbers are in your country and the proportions and so on, then you can go to that website and get a whole lot of material. So please tweet it and send it around to other countries, to other media outlets. This perspective just came through from Tim Lobstein around the latest childhood prevention estimates, and there are appendices with data in there. So please make the most use of that. Okay, now this is adult obesity. We don't have a similar kind of map for childhood obesity, and I don't have a pointer, but you can see that these are 22 sub-regions. The blue and the green are normal weight, and the yellow and orange and red are overweight and obesity by different sections. And you can see, first of all, for adults, everything's going in the wrong direction, but you can see that sub-regions, and it's true for countries as well, are going there at different rates. So if you take, for example, down the bottom here, this is Polynesia and Micronesia. You carry that trajectory out and pretty soon there won't be any normal weight people in those countries. So there's quite a lot of heterogeneity. And if we put that onto a general kind of cartoon of it, then I think this is the pattern of the obesity epidemic. We're in this upswing and we are going up at quite different rates depending on the countries we live in, depending on our ethnicity, depending on our wealth and so on. And we're getting up to a point and hopefully working out how to get around the corner to come down the other side. The rather frightening thing is that low middle income countries have been later into this epidemic but are rising much faster. And now if you look at those numbers with childhood obesity, you'll find that low middle income countries are responsible for most of the overweight and obesity in childhood and in adulthood. So that's a bit of a challenge. That's where we've been going up. So why, the question I've been asked to answer, why have we been going up like this? What's driving it? Well, we get a few hints from, this is adults again, so this is the N. Haynes study, and each of those lines is an age group and their percent of overweight and obesity by different years. And what you can see here very clearly is that each age group is all going up the same in unison. And this is in fact the hallmark of an obesogenic environment, an environmental effect that's kind of sweeping across the whole population, and we are all being affected in each age group. And this will be true for children as well. So the question is, how are we going to get out of this epidemic? Are we going to reverse it in the same way that we went up? I don't think so, actually. And the reason I don't think so is because, what will the downswing look like? The reason I don't think we will be is because now, at least for adults, we have large majority of the population that is already overweight and obese, and if anybody has tried to lose weight, they will know how difficult that will be. I think the downswing of this epidemic is going to be much more driven by cohort effects of new kids coming up to be adults at a lower rate than we saw on the upswing. Not much cohort effect in that upswing. And this has big implications, I think, for our health systems, all of the diabetes and the health problems that are related to obesity are still going to be around for many, many decades to come, until hopefully these skinnier kids will come through and reduce diabetes and so on. But there is a bit of good news. This report from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation came out in the US earlier this year. There are lots of different reports saying childhood obesity is starting to flatten off in the US, or it's starting to come down. Are these true? And so they commissioned this report and had a look around various places and found, yes, indeed it was true, that there were declining rates of childhood obesity in many areas. So that's good. Seem to be more linked to comprehensive actions, which is what you might expect, but much less progress on reducing health inequalities. And this is really important because we've got two goals for this childhood obesity. One is to bring down the prevalence, and the other is to reduce the inequalities and the disparities by socioeconomic status, by ethnicity, and so on. So that is a challenge, and to do both of those things together requires actually a concerted effort. If we just leave it up to what's happening in the media, then the wealthy kids are going to turn the corner much more quickly than the poorer kids. So let me just give you an example of this. These are data from England, the monitoring that they have there, excellent monitoring system of childhood overweight and obesity. The top set of graphs in the red is the 4 to 5 year olds, and then slightly older kids and the 10 and 11 year olds, and least deprived on the left, most deprived on the right. So you can see that socioeconomic gradient, and each bar is a year. So you can see with the young kids, the 4 to 5 year old kids, in the wealthiest end of the spectrum, they have low rates and they're starting to go down. If you look at the most deprived kids, they're flattening off in that younger age group. Slightly older kids is a somewhat different picture, where the least deprived kids are flattening off, but the most deprived kids are still increasing. So this tells us that the first turnaround in this epidemic is going to be in young kids. And that kind of makes sense. They're very environmentally dependent. There's lots of wonderful carers around who care for them and want to have the best for them. They get fed their food. There's the difference between a kindergarten, for example, and a school, in particular a high school, around food that's available is vast. So there is that gradient. If we just leave it up to education and what comes over the airwaves, we're going to get more of this. As we go over the corner, we're going to get increasing disparities. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, as Doug said, we have had a lot of reports, and there they all are for a decade or so, all recommending very evidence-based, feasible interventions, which in general don't happen, at least not the tough ones. Some of the stuff happens around the margin, and I think the big challenge is not what we're going to do, but how we're going to get it implemented. That's the challenge. And so why are these recommendations not turned into action? That is the reason we're here. We know what to do, it's just not happening. And so I think that's important to ask this question: why has there been so little progress on childhood obesity? Well, I think that it's in three areas. First of all, we've got serious opposition here. We've got food industry, which has a lot of money and is fighting very hard against that. And they're also very smart. They've got lots of techniques that they use to try to head off regulation at the pass and to prevent those policies being implemented. Lack of government leadership. Now, part of that is the chill effect, that they don't want to actually get into a dogfight with the industry, because that will burn up a lot of political energy, a lot of political capital. But also they may believe in education and market fixes anyway. Oh, I know, we've got a government like that, and that's what they want to do. That's what they believe is going to work. The trouble is, well, actually it was interesting listening to those kids, wasn't it? It was all about physical activity and personal responsibility. I think some of those kids could turn out to be fine politicians in the future. So I think there's problems, there's difficulties in many countries with governance anyway, but even in countries like my country and your country, it was still quite difficult to get these things through. And the third one is that actually we're not pushing it. Where's the pressure? Where's the pressure that lands on the politicians' desks where they're forced to do this? And while there might be general support, general public support, certainly plenty of health professional support, it's a quiet support. It's not a noisy support. It's not a demanding action support. And part of that might be because obesity is not really a very easy social movement to rally around, and maybe we need to find other ways to do that. But this lack of social pressure is actually a big part of why we're not getting anywhere, and that's an onus on us. Okay, so this is a schema that we put together for Lancet series a few years ago, and which tries to put out all of the causes and the solutions in one hit, if you like. So if you start on the right-hand side, the physiology and the behaviours, that's what the kids were talking about. That's what politicians talk about. That's what we think about, and that's where most of the evidence is, and that's the easiest thing to do, and the least important. As you shift to the left, and if you go over to the environmental drivers, particularly the food supply, then you'll see that that's where a lot of those policies are that's in the ECHO report that's not getting implemented. And there are, of course, a lot of environmental moderators. But actually, part of the reason we're stuck here, that we can't get that happening, is because there are a lot of systemic drivers, some deep systemic drivers in the political economy about why we are in this position. We are built for growth, we're built for consumption, we're built for overconsumption, so it's not surprising we've got obesity. So unless we wander up into that left-hand side of the diagram where the intervention is the most important, the most difficult, and with the least evidence, we're going to be faced in a challenge. And we need to go up there with other movements as well, like climate change, for example. So how do we get here? Well, I think there's been a global rise in obesogenic environments, particularly the food environment. I think that's the driver, the predominant driver. It's moderated, obviously, by existing environments. Gee, walking up through Uppsala when all I came across was bikes and a few buses was just wonderful. I mean, that is a non-obesogenic environment which is protecting the people of this town. I wish we had more of that. There are known and agreed policies which are not being implemented for those three reasons I've just talked about. And my question really, is it, if we want to focus on these deeper determinants of childhood obesity, do we go wandering up there? We can't even get the basic stuff like sugary drinks taxes done or restrictions on marketing to junk food. Do we need to go right up into that political economy space? Is that just fanciful or is it absolutely fundamental? Thanks.
Please stay. Just one question about politics. You've written about accountability and policy making in this. The policymakers who actually do respond, do they have something in common? Is this a question of Gini coefficient, income spread in countries, strong local government, etc.?
Well, I think the politicians do have a lot of things in common, and politicians are trapped a little bit by the whole politics of it, so they might start off with great ideas, but then they do get trapped in the politics and the media cycle and the pressure from various lobby groups and things. I do think that local communities and towns and cities and things may well be a way to get more traction. The politicians are more accessible. They don't have freedom to perhaps put taxes or restrict junk food marketing, but they have quite a lot of potential, and I think working at the city levels and town levels is actually a good way forward.
Thank you, Boyd.